Yes, and we're live now, and so it's my incredible pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Paul Tyson to the Darcy Hill Commons podcast. And by way of introduction, I'm going to so I'm struggling a little bit with the technology today. Apologies. Dr. Paul Tyson is an integral thinker who works across theology, philosophy, and sociology. Metaphysics and epistemology, understood not only philosophically and theoretically, but equally theologically and sociologically, are his areas of interest. So you're getting a sense that he covers a lot, and I think one of the key phrases here is integral thinker. At present, he is a principal investigator and the project co-coordinator for the After Science and Religion project run through IASH. And I wanted to also, we're going to focus a little bit today primarily on his book, 7 Brief Lessons on Magic. So without further ado, I want to welcome again Dr. Tyson, if I can get the screen correct here. Apologies. Where are we now? Oopsie. Should be coming up. Here we go. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Tyson, so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure that you're here today.
Lovely to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation.
Oh, no, really, it's my pleasure and honor. I wanted to start by asking you, if I may, how do you define magic? What is magic?
Okay, my little book, 7 Brief Lessons on Magic, which I'll just sort of...
Please, yes.
Got a nice unicorn on the front.
Yes, oh yes.
It's a slim little thing. It's designed for a transatlantic flight. So yes. It's 20,000 words. And it's my sort of response to another beautiful little book of the same size called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carla Rovelli, which is a really very helpful read if you are interested in physics as a layman. So I thought it was a great book, except he really didn't understand anything theological or metaphysical. Apart from that, it was fantastic. So I thought, well, I'll fill in the same procedure and write about the things that science can't see, which is how I define magic. So magic is anything that science can't see: love, meaning, purpose, intelligibility, thought. All these things that are invisible to our scientific gaze are what I'm calling magic.
Muted myself there. Well, so all the things that the scientific gaze cannot see, which is a lot, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that the scientific gaze can't see. I mean, the assumption is in sort of mainstream lay circles that, well, what's the meme? It's science, right? Exclamation mark. That science kind of covers it all. And well, if we don't know something about something, well, I'm sure the scientists have figured it out. But historians of religion and otherwise, I mean, sort of intellectual historians realize, people like yourself know very well that there's so much that doesn't meet not only the naked eye, the human eye, but the eye of the, let's say in sort of simplistic terms, the microscope or the scientific microscope. What are some of these things that don't meet the eye, the scientific gaze, as it were? And why don't they meet the scientific gaze? Why can't they be seen?
Very good. So I should have had a quick spin through this before our conversation, because I've been writing other books, but we'll see how we go.
Of course, no.
Pardon me. So science, we have this problem of a kind of reductive view of reality. So there's two extremes that I don't like. I don't like an anti-science view or a scientifically reductive view. So things tend to sort of polarize one way or the other, very unhelpfully. And I'm saying, well, sure, read 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. You'll get a bit of great education on some of the really fascinating stuff going on in our understanding of the physical world. And it's magical, right? It really is amazing. However, it's much broader than what that lens of analysis can see. And we tend to get stuck on the idea that scientists talk about real things, and everybody else is just kind of making up their own opinions and beliefs, and they don't really, if you can't analyze it scientifically, then it doesn't really exist. Okay. Now, the problem with that is it generates this abstract idea of reductively physical reality as real reality, and everything else is made up. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bruno Latour's beautiful work.
A little bit, yes, a tiny bit, yes.
So he sort of points out to this kind of polarization between nature and culture. So we think of nature as the stuff that science can understand, and if it's physically there and measurable, that's nature. And everything else about meanings and purposes and values and metaphysics and beliefs and religion and relationships and all that other stuff, that's part of culture. However, culture is really just an effervescence of nature. It's not a real thing. Nature is the real thing. Culture is a construct over the top of nature.
Yes.
So this kind of view of reality where there's physical stuff is real and then culture constructs meanings is not how we experience reality. Yes. We experience the meanings as real. and I'm saying, well, why don't we take that a bit more seriously? Why do we think, physical things are real and qualitative things are made up? Maybe qualitative things aren't made up. Maybe in fact, when you look at the complexity of physical things, qualitative things are realer. Right?
Yes.
The further you go into trying to, unify quantum mechanics and relativity, the harder physical reality gets to get a grasp on. So actually what physical reality is a mystery, as much as anything else. And so we live in a world where mystery is actually normal, and we shouldn't be scared of mystery, and we should allow mystery to speak to us in the same register of reality as we allow science to speak to us. Now, this doesn't mean you can prove in sort of mathematical and reductively sensory terms things that are qualitative in the way that you can for things that are physical, right? But I'm not just so many grams of carbon-based organic matter. And then nobody, excepting my university administration, treats me like that. So we actually, there's something, we experience the world through the lens of being people and the world itself being meaningful. And this is now outside the categories of our philosophy. Our philosophy, since Immanuel Kant, and we won't go sort of long digs into that, but we only deal with the phenomenal world. We only deal with the world as we know it. And what the world really is, we can't say. But we can use sort of empirical and rational measures to analyze our phenomena. But, the world itself is between our ears. And this is not how anyone actually lives. This is an abstract theoretical framework that our academic and culture imposes on our knowledge discourse and says reality is about only reductively physical things, as if only reductively physical things actually exist, as if there's no real quality, right? But there are much richer and deeper traditions than our present one, which treat the qualitative and the essential and the and thought and being and meaning as essentially real. And
what are some of these traditions that these things are unreal? And a couple of things. Sorry, before shifting to that, you used the word mystery earlier, and can you say what do you understand by mystery? I mean, for me, as someone who my background, my original undergraduate degree was in English, and kind of temperamentally more of an artist than anything else, hence my hair and this kind of fancy scarf. So the idea of mystery is something that is sort of existentially very real for me on a day-to-day basis, as far as sort of trying to tap into, and I don't want to be putting words into your mouth, but at least from my point of view, it's life is mysterious and magical and sort of funny and scary and all those things. So way more again than 2+2=4 or H2O is water, and even, I mean, that doesn't, H2O does not capture the whole reality of water itself. What is mystery as far as you're concerned?
Okay, well, I think mystery is the natural way of looking at the world, and every child does it, and you learn how not to do it. Okay, and when I have four daughters, I'm a very rich man, and
I have a 12-year-old son, so yeah.
Yes, and every time the mystery of birth, it absolutely kind of blows your head, right? And then we walk around the park with our babies in our pushers, and everyone would stop and have a look at them, and the baby will look straight into their eyes, right? And you just have soul on soul contact with the baby.
Yes.
And you can't explain it, but that's the natural mystery of the world, and we sort of grow dull to it as we get older. And so, one of my favorite passages of the Christian scriptures is Matthew 18 verse 3, where Jesus says, "You should become like a little child who can't enter the kingdom of heaven." And the child is open to the wonder and richness of experience in a way that you have to make sure you don't lose, right?
Yes.
Or else something in you dies.
I remember seeing this quote, to that very point, some things you just said. I remember seeing this quote. It was many years ago outside, one of the sort of chain bookstores in the UK, Waterstones. There was a quote from Mark Twain that said, "I never let my schooling replace my education," or something like that. Sometimes, very often, it's through our very schooling and so-called education that we're taught to think in these very sort of simplistic terms, ultimately superficial terms. I mean, you describe. I mean, I really appreciate how you described the child, the young baby who looks back at the person peering into the pram, sort of soul on soul contact. Like, what is that? Like, you can't just explain that empirically, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it any kind of reductively instinctual explanation misses it. It's not that instincts aren't there, but it's just so much bigger than that. And
Yes.
so I think this is what I really want to emphasize is these things are natural. Mystery is natural and obvious, and there's something we get formed by our culture and our education to pay less attention to those things as we get older, and more attention to the things you can simply manipulate and control. And what's stunning about the vision of a child is Martin Buber's fantastic on this. Okay, so any I and thou contact is a contact of love. Okay, so I remember my little 3-year-old daughter when she's 21 now, but she would talk to her breakfast.
She would talk to her breakfast. Oh wow!
Flowers, and the piece of toast was Uncle David, and like everything was kind of alive, and relational. Everything, and this is you can look at that as kind of a naive and simplistic view of the world, or you can look at it as there is a profound insight that the child sees naturally before they're, in a sense, deformed by our way of seeing the world, to pay less attention to the things of love and more attention to the things of control. So and of course in the particularly in the Christian scriptures, which is connected to Jewish and Islamic scriptures, you know, the first form of knowledge is love.
Yes.
And there's a very deep and rich wisdom tradition in this area that the children remind us of. And for some reason, we're meant to be all grown up and enlightened now, and and not pay much attention to that. Well, I'm saying, well, we need to pay attention to that.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. No, we're sort of enculturated to become sort of very mechanical almost in how we interact with the world. And I absolutely 100% agree with you about how children engage with the world. I think the mystical traditions, in all the integral traditions, have this very profound understanding in keeping with the biblical verse you quoted a short while ago, that we must ultimately. I remember hearing this really powerful Sufi teaching story a number of years ago. There's the Sufi teacher who had, as the story goes, had his students over in the front room, and at one point he sort of got up, left the room, and came back with this young baby, this newborn baby, and he said to his students, the teacher said, you must become like the baby. You must become like this baby. Basically just completely open and sort of unsullied as far as perception of the world. The famous, cleansing the doors of perception, or all that type of stuff, right? Sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I'm just agreeing. Yes.
Okay, no. So can you say a little bit about, you have 4 theories of magic? Perhaps you
Good idea. I'll get the book out to check up that I'm on the
Yes.
same page.
No, that's perfect. I love that, people, your output clearly is so extensive that you're reminding yourself, and that's beautiful. I love it. We should always be, creating new stuff and not be stuck. Your book's very fresh, clearly, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm writing in this same area all the time, but this area covers everything. So I try and say we've got 4 different models of seeing nature.
Yes.
Which I call 4 different theories of magic. So the first one I talk about is what I call the animist theory of magic, where everything is alive.
Yes.
And in a sense, this is quite common. This is quite similar to the child's view.
Yes.
Right. However, in the animist sort of discourse, as a vision of nature, there's no transcendence. The magic is in the world. It's not beyond the world. So this magic in the world with no transcendence is it's quite in some ways compatible with Lucretius. It's kind of with the sort of ancient naturalism. So and people like Carlo Rovelli are very interested in this as well. They're interested in the way in which the physical world is alive and mysterious, right? And can't be simply boxed as sort of dead boxes. So that's one vision of the world, one sort of theory of nature, and then I look at what I call a Platonist theory of magic, which is like the animist theory in that the world is full of mystery and soul, and transcendence reaches into the world, but is also above the world. So it's kind of got the world is an immanent world that is situated within a transcendent reality that is bigger than the immanent world. So that's quite different as a way of thinking about nature.
Yes.
So these are both pre-modern views. Then I talk about the 2 modern views. I've got 2 pre-moderns and 2 moderns.
Yes.
So the third view I call the supernatural theory of magic, and this is where you have a 2-story universe. You've got the natural and the supernatural, and they're kind of totally separate. And which I think is a kind of a dualist view and has all sorts of problems. The biggest problem being that you don't need the second story, which leads to the fourth view, which is an anti-magical theory of magic. So all you have is the bottom story of the two-story view, that the world is just flat stuff. So you've got these four different ways of thinking about the meaning of nature, which I call four different theories of magic. And if we try, and typically modern people, we try and understand what magic is through these last two theories. And so I try and pull those two theories apart and get rid of them and say, well, really, we have to choose between the first two theories if we're going to be serious about the reality of our experiences of meaning and thought and intelligibility and love and goodness. So both of those.
Sorry. No, I was just going to, sorry to interrupt. What would you say to, say, perhaps critics who would say, well, the theories that we apply today, they clearly work. You know, we get incredible technological results. We can mine the earth for all its worth, right? We can in the future, we're going to be mining space itself and things like that. It clearly works. We look at everything that we've achieved. What are you talking about? You have some thoroughly romanticized understanding of things, and there's a reason why we don't think in these terms anymore, because it's from an evolutionary point of view. We've just evolved past these childish ways of looking at the world. What do you want to take us back to the Stone Age? What are you doing? And that's not my view, but that could be a criticism leveled against what you're arguing.
Right. So I have a go at that from a number of angles in this little book. I've been thinking a lot about Immanuel Kant lately, so I'll have a go from that angle at the moment.
Please, yes.
What we tend to get, let's start with Francis Bacon. Okay, so back at what we call the scientific revolution, which is a 20th century term, someone like Francis Bacon was very motivated by a particular type of Christian theology. So he thought that science was going to bring on the end of the world, and that the calling of humanity as made in the image of God was to be like God and have control over our sphere of the world of reality. And God gave us the earth to control. And when we had knowledge and the increase of knowledge and the movement of people all over the world, which is on the cover of his great instantiation, this prophecy from the book of Daniel.
Yes.
This is this is an eschatological vision of science. This is where it starts. It's a strangely Christian eschatological vision, right? So we're going to bring on, we're going to get the world under our control by mastering the world. And so he wasn't interested in metaphysics or Aristotle. He was interested in what you could do. So the modern scientific vision has a pragmatic sort of tweak to it right from the beginning, even though at the beginning that pragmatic tweak was embedded in theology, right? But the incredible instrumental power of the mathematical experimental method, which the Royal Society famously championed, okay, it's philosophically naive to say that it's true because it works, right? And no serious skeptic will let you get away with that. Sextus Empiricus wouldn't let you get away with that, right? But it does work, and that's impressive. So we developed over time. We developed this interest in if we can make it work, that's as good as truth. Okay, it never is. Truth and use are not the same thing, right? So I can still navigate on a boat using the old vision of the the stars rotating around the Earth. Okay, I can still use a geocentric model in my navigation, and it works. That doesn't make it true, right?
Well, so if I may interject very briefly, so I mean, a potential challenge again could be, well, my understanding is that a lot of ideas about how the world works today are invariably shaped by powerful economic forces, right? So the machine of capitalism is such that it's really only, it seems to me, primarily interested in what quote unquote works, in what makes money. And I mean, I've my father's currently ill now, so not to kind of belittle him, but factually speaking, I mean, this is my life experience growing up under his, having him as my father. He's a very, he's a very accomplished businessman and so forth, and very that way oriented as far as money is concerned. And the number of times he said to me, critically, well, you're all theory, right? And for him, he's a very quote unquote practical man, right? I get, perhaps you see what I'm trying to say is to many people, you mentioned that to a seasoned skeptic, shall we say, like from a serious philosophical point of view, the idea that just because it works makes it true would not hold water. However, from a capitalist point of view, it almost doesn't matter what the philosopher thinks, right? Because he or she, primarily he, mostly men, is raking in the money as we speak, right? So, I mean, that was a bit of a long-winded interjection, but...
oh, sure. I don't know if you know of Jacques Ellul's work.
No.
Amazing guy. He wrote this book, The Technological Society. It's a ripper.
Oh, Jacques Ellul. Yes, of course. Sorry, of course. Yeah, I misheard. Yeah, oh, incredible. Yes. Yeah, please say more. Yes, the Technological Society. Yes.
Yeah. So he kind of takes up Marx's insight that we've all become consumers in a way, and we're part of a machine. We become the tools of our tools.
Yes.
And this points back to where we started with the kind of the reductive vision. If you have a reductive vision of reality, that actually is a theory. This is what I'm trying to say about these different theories of magic, these different theories of nature. If you have a theory that the world is only physical stuff, that determines your practice. You can't say practice is never theoretical. You can't say theory is never practical. They're always together.
Of course.
And if we think the world is simply about physical things that you can manipulate and control with mathematical experimental knowledge and a bit of magical mathematics if you're into finance,
right?
Then that influences the way you behave in the world, and that influences the way you treat other people in the world. And the risk of that is, if you have an instrumental view of the world, you will think of yourself and other people as tools.
Yes.
And so the child insight, the insight of love and the insight of intrinsic value will be lost to you, and you'll be spiritually crippled and dangerous as a result. Okay. So theory and practice are always together. I love the modern age, right? I love the fact that we have got control over illnesses. It's a nice thing, right?
Well, supposedly, apparently we have, but then the past year has shown that apparently, I mean, who knows?
Well, it's complex. It's complex, as you know, but nonetheless, I'm really glad for penicillin, right? I don't have to die if I get a tooth infection. So there's some really nice benefits of things that work. Yes. And so I'm not saying, I'm got one foot with bacon, right? Part of the business of being human is trying to get a bit of control over your environment so you don't just become victims of chance and happenstance. And that's a good part to that, right? But if that's the only thing, then you tend to become a machine. and you tend to lose your soul. So sure, I'm arguing for a bigger view of reality where, but that does where there are things more than just does it work, right? But it's not that I have no interest in things that work. Things that work have their place, right? But it's the problem if you have a view of nature where the only real things are things you can touch and control, instrumentally and by maths and experiment, then you miss dimensions of reality which are strikingly obvious. Right? And then you go to the world with this tunnel vision, doing a lot of damage because you can't see past, just making money. So this is why we need this bigger vision, right? It's damaging and it'll kill us all in the end. A purely pragmatic view of the world is actually the worst thing for us practically.
And it is killing us right already. It's no, I really appreciate everything you've been
I'll
saying.
just advertise another book I just finished. Sorry about advertising.
No.
This is called Theology and Climate Change.
Yes.
It looks very closely at Bacon's idea. The particular theology in early modernity.
This is your newest book, is it?
Yeah. My
Amazing!
book.
Oh, God bless you. That's amazing. Yeah, incredible. Yeah. Well, so yeah. Please continue. Yes.
So we don't appreciate that we have this dominate and control nature, this instrumental approach to nature for theological reasons. We don't appreciate that, right? And because we don't even think we've got a theology, someone who's the executive shell or whatever, right? God bless them. They may not have any theology at all, but the idea that we have this sort of instrumental right to stand over nature and to do with it whatever we like for the sake of our needs at the time has a theological basis, going back to Bacon, going back to a particular view of the world. And so the fact that we're not consciously able to touch the theoretical frameworks that we are now practically embedded in makes it very hard for us to change, because we don't realize the relationship between theory and practice. Again, we just think, like, I don't know if you must be familiar with Peter Berger's beautiful work on the social construction of reality.
Yes.
We take the reality we live in as real,
Yes.
but it's not. It's a system of practice and belief that everyone around us accepts without question. So unless we can be like the child, and children, again, they always ask why, and after the third time, you don't know the answer.
Yes, that's so profound. That's true. And what's a typical parental response when one doesn't know the answer? Because human nature is typically not want to admit, especially vis-a-vis a child. An adult doesn't want to admit that they don't know. So what's a good answer and what's a typical answer to the third question?
The good answer which will give your child an awful lot of trouble is, I don't know.
Yes.
It won't give them personally trouble, but if they are accustomed to not being fobbed off when they go to school, they'll get into trouble. So you don't need to know, or I can't explain it to you, is never a good answer. Yes, if you can't give the child a reasonable answer, and then you should say, I don't know.
I'm reminded traditionally in the Islamic context, it used to be, and it's still said, but I think people very often forget this, that it used to be said that to say la adri, literally to say I don't know, is half of all knowledge, because that assumes that I have more to know. It assumes, it's the sort of Socratic notion, right? Of I don't know, but that's really the beginning of all knowledge and wisdom. What's the remedy? What are some of the remedies to these? So many things that you've been saying are very profound. The idea that if we only see our relationship to the world and to each other even in sort of these mechanical, instrumentalized terms as to what works and what makes money, then we become soulless. And this is very, very important. And my sense is that only this type of language can only come from someone who has a theological perspective on things, someone who has a perspective that is ultimately much more capacious than a very, as far as I'm concerned, a very superficial reading of reality. That so, what are some of the solutions? Can some of these? I mean, as far as I can tell, that recently Donald Rumsfeld passed away a couple of days ago, I think. So they reported, and I mean, I can't help but feel, looking at some of his pictures, that, and considering all that he did, all the things that he made happen in the Middle East in highly destructive terms, that someone of his makeup is not thinking in a very theological sense. Or maybe, I mean, unconsciously he's importing, I mean, we're all thinking in a theological sense ultimately, if we take it far back enough. But it's interesting how the original motivations, I mean, you mentioned the example of Bacon, similar, I mean, in a similar vein, of course, famously, Descartes, when he originally sort of set out to formulate his formulations in the Meditations, he was ultimately interested in proving the existence of God, right? But then that part kind of got sloughed off, and we just have the sort of bare framework of what he left us with. And but I mean, the question, so what is my question? How do we remedy this situation? If we have these zombies walking around, I mean, as a sort of observer of culture, I can't help but wonder why this incredible fascination with zombies at the moment. They're popping up everywhere, movies all over the place. I mean, is it from one point of view, sort of from one perspective, a serious commentary on where we are societally, culturally, especially in the West, but not only. I just recently watched the brilliant director Jim Jarmusch's sort of treatment of this topic. It's called "The Dead Don't Die," and he very clearly showed, initially when we see these zombies sort of walking almost aimlessly and very slowly, drugged, looking, I mean, almost like drugged up people. They Different zombies were citing different things. Like one said fashion, one would be mumbling fashion, another would be mumbling this, that, and the other sort of consumer stuff. So anyway, what's the remedy to this soullessness?
Okay. I would like to have another go at Kant, but use Harry Potter here as well.
Yes. Please,
yes. So it's fascinating that even though, and we've got a great economics professor here at Queensland who's written a book on zombie economics, which is a ripper. How bad ideas just don't die in economics. So we have persuaded ourselves that only the things you can see and touch are real, and as a result, we have developed this cultural blindness to the things that make our lives meaningful. And there's this huge hunger, like I really like philosophy, and I remember when I was a young man, I had to read Language, Truth and Logic by A.J. Ayer, and it's a ridiculously boring piece of it's very smart, okay, but it was a huge seller. I think it sold 20 million copies or something. Okay, 20 million copies is absolutely enormous for philosophy, but 500 million copies of Harry Potter, I mean, there's no comparison. People are interested in meaning, and they can only get it through fantasy, right? Our concepts of the real world don't allow you to have a view of meaning. So people are hungry for fantasy. And sociologically, this is a really interesting phenomena, So so we know the world is meaningful. Our life is, we're unable to actually live as if things aren't meaningful, right? As if we don't really have a soul, as if we're not really thinking, as if meaning and value and purpose don't matter. We're not actually able to live like that, but theoretically, we think like that. And it comes back to Kant. So I'll have a quick attempt to see if I can crack Kant for you, if you're okay with that. Okay, I can't hear you. You must be muted again, but...
So yeah, no, please, absolutely, yeah. No, as I'm sort of toggling back and forth, I'm muting myself. No, please go ahead. Yes, thank you. Yes.
So I have a quick go. I can't. So we have this problem in the 18th century where the rationalists can do wonderful a priori thinking, where 1 + 1 always equals 2. The problem with that is you can't get it ever to connect with the world of physical experience, because it's a tautological, self-defined, rational system inside your head, okay? And on the other hand, we've got Hume saying you can never move from a posteriori experience to a universal rational system. The two don't follow. The fact that the pencil goes down when I drop it, I can only tell after I've dropped it. You know, probabilistically, I can say it's likely to happen, right? But I can't prove that it will happen on the basis of experience. So Kant solves the problem of rationalism being incompatible with empiricism by getting rid of reality. Okay, it's fantastic. Okay, it was such a neat answer. Right? So we're not interested in what the real world happens. We're only interested in how we perceive the world. And in the way we perceive the world, our reason structures our experience, and our experience is connected with we sensory construct an experiential world in our head. And so let's just deal with that world in our head of phenomena and not worry about the noumena anymore. And this is, metaphysics is cut out, and it never comes back in Western philosophy after that point. And so we no longer believe in the real as outside of the constructed world of our consciousness. And so if we construct our consciousness to be reductively pragmatic, that's reality to us, right? And we cut ourselves off from the obvious porosity of transcendence into ordinary life, which is everywhere and all about you. And we couldn't have a conversation if we weren't two thinking beings communicating, right? Which is not empirically or rationally explainable. And so ridiculously intelligent beings come up with the theory that they don't really exist.
To that very point, I remember, oh goodness, I forget his, I think it was Stanley Cavell who made this point vis-a-vis, thinking through a Cartesian understanding of the self. He said, based on that understanding of the self, the fact that two people, yourself and myself, for example, can be having a conversation, understand each other and connect, is completely, it can't be explained. It cannot be explained, yes.
We have a fundamental egotism problem, a solipsist problem that Hume understood very well, and it hasn't gone away. Our concept of our high culture of philosophy has just chopped out metaphysics. And there are brilliant people like William Desmond. I don't know if you know William's work, and David Schindler. There are brilliant people who are saying, well, Kant's move never really actually worked. It's just a convenient trick. And if you pay attention to the life that you actually live, if you go down to the park with your baby and watch soul-on-soul contact between two people, right, then that's the real world. And if your theory doesn't fit that, your theory's wrong.
Yes.
So it's not that difficult, but we have this, the thing we like about getting rid of noumena and transcendence is that we decide the rules now, okay? it's kind of back to the Garden of Eden. We shall be as God, right? It's up to us how the world is. And if I'm rich and powerful and I want to set it up to perpetuate my own power, that is the world. And we don't have any, our wisdom traditions are being so eroded by our knowledge traditions that we form our children to accept that really reductive view of reality. And so now what really matters is that you make a lot of money and you do well in life, right? Rather than that you actually discover some sort of divine meaning to life. Who cares?
It's a crime. It's honestly a crime how children are deformed, right? They come into this world for as you full of wonder and curiosity and an innate sense and appreciation of beauty. And through our schooling, through our parenting and what have you, we just turn them eventually. And it's almost a miracle that people still have a sense of somehow, some people, often, not always, but somehow we maintain nevertheless an appreciation of the mysterious. It's really criminal. And what the very notion of success, the notion that to be materially successful is what it means to be successful. However, to have no appreciation, next to no appreciation of transcendent dimensions, dimensions that ultimately enrich us in the deepest sense. To have no sense of that at all is apparently not a problem. That's really criminal, and I can't help sort of make use of or resort to traditionally theological language in saying that it's demonic. I feel that it's actually it's certainly not godly. So if it's not godly, if it's the inverse of godly, I can't help but feel it's demonic. Not to say that these philosophers, some of these philosophers you've been citing were demonic, but you mentioned quite powerfully that we live in a world where knowledge has triumphed over wisdom, right? It's not very often people will say, right, the kind of meme, as it were, is let's say vis-a-vis racism or something like that, right? Is, oh, it's just a problem of ignorance. People just don't have better knowledge. They're ignorant. I would contend, in general, the awful, some of the awful realities of the world today that we see around us, whether it's the degradation of the natural world. I mean, to the point of, God knows if we can reverse things, to all sorts of huge challenges. It's not from a lack of intelligence. Right. I mean, it's probably we have too much intelligence, but not enough wisdom.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
You're familiar with Max Weber's work.
Yes.
He talks about the sort of the iron cage of bureaucratic rationality. So having instrumental systems, can be valuable, right? Having bureaucratic structures can be great, but it has this tendency to sort of perpetuate order and control to a point where there is no human freedom. And it's not just government organizations, something like Google and Facebook can do this, right?
Yeah. And in some ways, some may argue that they're even more powerful than.
They are amazing. Shoshana Zuboff's latest book on surveillance capitalism.
My goodness,
stuff, right? Yeah. So this is Weber's iron cage taken to a whole nother level.
Oh my goodness.
So we have I think demonic is the right word. we have established sort of orders of power that control us, that have gotten away from us and taken on their own life.
Yes.
Yes. And there's a beautiful book by Shannon Ross called Gifts, Glittering and Poisoned, which looks through the eyes of Augustine at the entertainment culture and the spectacle culture of the modern age.
Yes.
And says, well, the demonic is the category we need to think about here. So there's nothing, I'm not impressed by finding devils under every chair. Right? However, the demonic is a category we need to take more seriously, as is the angelic.
Yes.
And I'm talking seriously sociologically. There's interesting literature. The French are really good at this sort of stuff. People like Ricoeur and I can't remember his name, but it starts with C, who did a look at bureaucracy and how bureaucracies take on their own life. They develop their own sort of energies and powers and structures. And Habermas is great on this too. Okay, so Zygmunt Bauman. So I'm just going to sprout these sociology people around here a bit. So we get the individual as an atom and the large organization, be it a commercial organization or a government. And the individual is like an atom of water, and the channels are created by these large powers, and you just sort of flow through, right? This is liquid modernity. The only thing that gives resistance to these are what Habermas calls middle order institutions: church, community, village, school, these sort of human scaled institutions that are bigger than the individual but smaller than an impersonal bureaucracy,
of course,
or a large business. And they are just getting decimated in our world. And the result is there is no refuge for children. So all my kids, my youngest is 13, right? So, but my kids have grown up with the iPhone. They've grown up with the internet in their pocket 24/7, right? And that makes them totally vulnerable to having continuous commercial forces in their pocket, in their brain, controlling their social relations in a way that I never grew up with. And there are no middle order community organizations to protect them from whatever they're being channeled towards. And they're supposedly having these enormous freedoms, right? But it's demonic. They are just everything Google and Facebook do is algorithmically designed to make someone some money. Right? So they're just so many pounds of so many grams of money. Right? And so it's profoundly dehumanizing, and it's totally changing. There's good sides to all this stuff, but there's very dangerous sides to this. And
I think there's some very profoundly dangerous sides to this. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, in keeping with everything you just said about the nature of these technologies and seeing us as, and they call it the attention economy now, right? So it's how can they monetize our attention, and all the data that's being generated every second, right? Insane amounts of data. These companies don't even know what they're going to do with them, but what they do know is that it can be monetized down the line. So it's all being stored. And another dimension, and not unrelated, because sex sells, right? And sex captivates and sex enthralls, the hypersexualization of society as a result of these technologies, right? In many ways, I can't help but feel that society at large has been going through for some time a pornographication, right? The nature in which these technologies work. It's what's the famous media theorist. Goodness, I'm blanking right now. Marshall McLuhan. I mean, right? Famously said. Anyway, but he makes the point that vis-a-vis sports games, when cameras were introduced to the field, it completely changed the nature of the game itself, because all of a sudden sportsmen, primarily then, they were, or entirely then, they were playing for the camera. It sort of opened them up in certain ways. And Marshall McLuhan was no prude, but I think he had some commentary on the impact of sex, but sort of expanding that analysis of how sports was opened up and changed by the presence of the camera, the gaze of the lens. I mean, I can't help but feel how our very sex lives are entirely being transformed. This very historically understood, very private sort of activity is completely, it's become a performance, and sometimes very, very dangerous ways, where now I think they recently did a study in the UK which was published looking at the sex lives, and not in quotation marks, the very real sex lives of school kids, and how toxic it is, and how young girls, I mean, by their fellow students, boys, are constantly being asked for nude pictures and things like that. So these technologies are very scary, and I'm no one has to, for some reason, resort. I don't know. I feel sometimes I have to resort to these. What's the word? Okay, excuse me. My brain's not functioning as well as it should, but. These apologies, and say, I'm no prude, but we have to be objective, or as sort of objective as possible, and say, calling a spade, and this spade is doing a lot of damage right now, as well as facilitating a lot of things as well.
Yeah, and this is another illustration of this flattening of the transcendent horizon. Okay, so we've lost a concept like marriage as a sacrament. We've lost the concept of a transcendent meaning to human sexuality, and so it all becomes transactional and simply about consent. And so we construct. No, I'm not saying not having. I'm not saying sex without consent is good, right? But we construct. We're incredibly lost. So we in Australia we've had these scandals in the Parliament House this past year, and the Prime Minister has finally decided that something has to be done, and women have to be treated better in Parliament, right? But so everything's swinging to the side where women have to do everything. You have to be women to get the job, and everything is all about consent. But again, it's a response that has no transcendent concept of the meaning of sexuality, and it presupposes complete constructivism in something we all know is more complex than construction. It's not that there's a lot of social construction in sexual norms, right? But the thing itself has a sacred reality that is otherwise everyone should be wankers. I mean, this is something we tangibly experience, like looking into the child of an eye. There's something meaningful about physical intimacy that's not simply made up, but we don't have language for it anymore. We don't have the metaphysical reaching into the immanent. We don't have the porosity of the physical to the spiritual in our mind and in our language. And so when we try and fix a problem, we fix it within this prison, this pre-existing limited reductionist view, and make it even worse in a different way. So, yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It's tragic and
Tragic.
very,
It's
very
very,
damaging.
very scary. Like, I really worry for my 12-year-old son. I mean, he's doing well. He lives in the States, and he's a smart, bright kid. But I worry. I can't help but worry as a parent. Like, what kind of world is he going into,
Yeah.
and going taking as a given that these are the norms because this is how it's been presented to him, and this is good. And because we're all being exposed to ideas, say about
Yeah, yeah.
sexuality
And
or what
like
have
I
you.
say, you've got this enormous contradiction where, um, women must be treated properly, and of course they must, right? But it's everyone's right to be as pornographic about everything as they feel like.
Right, which is a
Um,
deep
and
contradiction. Absolutely, yeah.
amazing. And why don't we get, if we're concerned about sexual respect for women, why don't we outlaw pornography? Oh, but you can't do that.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah,
again, I mean, I'm reminded uh, of the theological term demonic. It's it strikes me as a demonic sleight of hand.
yes,
It's
yes.
about it's about women's rights. Therefore, a woman can, and yes, a woman can and a man can and should feel free to do with their bodies as they see fit. But then, I mean, again, we lose sight of the, shall we say, the Foucauldian reading of things. How the norms are always uh, already always right constructed by some very complex institutions, and so how we view the world, we assume to be, oh, this is of my free choice that I am understanding the world to be a certain way, how interpersonal relations are supposed to be, sexual relations and things like that. But how have I been programmed to think this way, right? And the programming is incessant, right? The advertising is incessant in the movies. That there's, it's there is a message around. There's a messaging happening around sex, which someone, a critic might say, well, you just sound like an old fogey now. You're old, that's why you're thinking like this. But one just has to have a bit more of a historical lens about things, right? Which increasingly it seems we don't have anymore
But we have
to
the same
realize
thing
this.
with food. It's amazing, that like food has become, I don't know, cooking shows are the kind of the new pornography.
Right. Well,
um,
they even call it. There's even a term, right, for taking pictures of one's food, like food porn, right? They literally call it that.
yes, and so we but the thing is, we're trying to find meaning in our appetites. Okay,
Yes,
we're
yes, very
reaching
much
for
so.
the magical through our appetites, and with good reason. Like music, we're reaching through sensory experience to transcendence, to mystery, right? But we've lost the words for this. We're all made dumb about what we're searching for, and so we'll be satisfied with anything. um,
We're
so
satisfied with crumbs, and to your point, which again, I mean, these are all extremely profound points around the question of how you put it, that which we're seeking deeper meaning through our appetites. I'm reminded of the very, very influential, historically Islamic metaphysician, Sufi Imam Ghazali, his sort of massive magnum opus, The Revival of the Religious Sciences. There's one volume dedicated uh, to it's called The Breaking of the Two Desires. And the two desires are that of the stomach and the genitals, right? So the idea being, if we can be in control of these two desires, these are very fundamental desires, right? The need to, I mean, after the need to breathe, right, and drink water, like food is a fundamental desire, as is the desire to procreate. If those desires are if we're in control of those desires, then we can do more interesting things. And so, I can't help but reflect that the disciplinary, to use that kind of Foucauldian term again, the disciplinary regimes in all the integral traditions, the wisdom traditions, they in some shape or form revolve around how our relationship to food and our relationship to sex. And I don't think that's accidental. I mean, a sort of modern secular critic may say, well, this is because they want to control you. Yes, they want to control us, but to what end? Maybe controlling us on a horizontal level to attain sort of vertical freedom. That would be the say traditional understanding of things. But now, where I mean, what was the ancient Roman ploy, right? Bread and circus, right? It's bread and circus and now porn, right? It's like this is the ultimate again. I mean, I'm sorry to keep harping on the word demonic today, but like I can't help but feel that this is the ultimate demonic ploy of control. It's like complete, sex on tap, food on tap. Like, why are we ever going to think for ourselves, right?
It's the kingdom of pigs that Plato talked about.
Huh.
So yeah, so you just if we are slaves to our appetites, we are totally controllable.
Yes, 100%. We're completely docile, right?
And unless you have some control over your appetites, you don't have any real choice in your actions. And
Yes.
we'd be conditioned to not have choice in our actions through these wonderful conditioning saturations of the consumer world.
Yes.
And like you say, it's not spiritually neutral.
No, nothing is.
It has a spiritually deforming aim, the controlling conditions of our sensory experience in the consumer world.
Yes.
And
Well,
so, like I say, all the wisdom traditions have got big on self-control and big on not being a slave to your appetites. And this is kind of considered fogey and sort of
authoritarian.
body hating and all that sort of stuff, but not at all. You can't enjoy your body unless you're in control of it.
100%. 100%. How do we get out of this morass? What's the solution? What are some of the solutions?
Well, what I try and say in my little book on magic is that start at home. Okay. The magical world is as close as the next person you talk to, right? Just being aware of mystery and beauty in ordinary life is a kind of an act of revolt against the reductive consumerism which turns us into tools, the tools of our tools. So keeping the child alive, keeping an awareness of the breaking into our world of things above us that make the world meaningful, rather than only thinking what can we have mastery over. This is we all do it to some extent, right? But we should try and do that more and be less reduced to masters of an instrumental reductiveness in our daily lives. So this is the kind of things I try and say. This is where you should go with magic.
Well, that's beautiful. And so in practical terms, I mean, you mentioned already in practical terms, but could you give some examples, right? The human experience, I mean, I can't help but, again, I can't help but reflect that a lot of these companies, such as Facebook and Google, but especially Facebook in this instance, they're master psychologists. They know very profoundly, I mean, in really scary ways, how the human, how we function as a species, as individuals, and as collectives, and they're really kind of mining some of our not just lower instincts, but in many cases lower instincts, but also our desire for connection, right? I mean, this is a very human,
Yes.
and I would say a sacred desire that we have for deep intimacy, deep connection, not in some superficial sense. And so, hence, a company like Facebook is as successful as it is, I think. So when we interact with each other, just in what kind of intentionality do we bring to day-to-day interactions, would you say?
Okay. Exactly. And like you point out, the technologies that are very powerful are the ones that connect to the higher aspects of our nature, right? So communication is fundamental to our nature, right? So the technologies that promise enhanced communication, we are suckers for. Okay. Now, so my bit of resistance is to not have a mobile phone.
Well, that's amazing. I love
And
that. Yeah.
and I have three academic friends I know who also do this, and we're kind of a little sort of bizarre cult.
That's amazing. I mean, the fact that you can do that, I am so
It's
all.
almost illegal. It's almost illegal now.
It's almost a crime, right?
Yeah, yeah. I can't go to a coffee shop unless somebody else bleeps me in with their phone, and I'm their dependent for
Oh yeah. Oh
the
right. Oh my goodness.
COVID thing, right? So,
Oh my God. That's wow. That's fascinating. And we could just spend a lot of time just unpacking that itself. But that's yeah. Please
yeah,
continue.
so there are micro resistance you can do, which are actually enormously
Mm,
powerful.
mm,
Um, and so we don't have a TV in our house. We've never had one.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
and so we do watch DVD together on a Friday night. So
Yes.
it's not like we don't have any entertainment, but we want to make sure that when we're together as a family, we're together as a family. And my wife is an amazing cook, so that helps a lot.
Mm, mm,
um, I was okay before I got married, but then I bow to superior skill. um, so the and the micro, like we say, grace. These things are actually things. If you have micro practices that keep reminding you on a practical, on an ordinary, common base way of transcendence and of relationality and of meaning that is not commercial.
mm.
These are major acts of resistance in our day and age, and they're very hard to keep up, right? So you have to intentionally try to do them. Uh,
Mm.
we have family devotions as a family. So we have these things we do as part of our routine that we try and build into our routine
Yes.
that keep us practically embedded in trying to live with a transcendent horizon before God.
Beautiful.
And you don't get any help with this by the modern lifestyle. uh, and people of like mind need to kind of band together in those Habermasian middle order categories to have any chance at all.
Yes. Yes.
And it's fascinating. I remember talking to Ray Gingrich, a Anabaptist theologian from a Mennonite theologian, I think from Pennsylvania or somewhere, and he was saying how, like, people who are serious pacifists and trying to live their lives without being implicated in violence,
Mhm.
okay, can't do it by themselves because everything about our way of life is violent.
Mm.
And so you have to kind of clump together. But once you clump together, then you're big enough to be vomited out.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you're being digested, right? So, yeah.
No, I
So
love.
micro practices are much bigger than you think. Yeah.
Well, that's very powerful. That's very powerful, powerfully put, and very heartening because very often, I mean, I certainly go through moments of thinking, what can I do? Like, what can one individual do? What can a few people even working together do? I mean, I also believe a lot can be done, but just the micro practices, thinking, well, what does my prayer, well, what impact does that have? But I think I can't help but feel honestly that, in keeping with a lot of things you just said, that being religious in some shape or form today is a huge revolutionary act in this highly materialistic, superficial world that we're living in. This well, it's not even materialistic in the good old sense, right? It's all digital now, so
Virtual.
it's all virtual, right? It's not even physical.
We've attained platonic heaven of some sort, and
Right?
without talking, that's an insult to Plato. But
Well, I know that's really
yeah.
dark. That's really, I mean, God knows. Again, as a sort of consumer of popular culture, and as trying to decipher, maybe where things are going. And this is kind of an old reference point at this stage, right? The Matrix movie, or the trilogy, right? I can't help but feel that that's where we're heading. I mean, it's not going to be exactly like that, but maybe the Wachowskis were onto something when they had that kind of nightmarish vision of where things are going, where we're all
Well,
sort of jacked in.
we are living in a prison for our mind, um,
Yes, yes.
and 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 we have minders.
We have minders. Can you say a little bit more about that, please?
Oh, well, um, okay, so I really recommend this beautiful book by Shannon Ross called Gifts, Glittering and Poisoned, which takes Augustine's view of the spectacle culture of his day, which was the arena, okay,
Mm.
and says, well, they were very explicit. These were demons, right?
Wow.
You had them in there, and the whole. So in classical Greek thinking, a daemon is a middle order divine being. So
Mm.
there's mortals at the bottom, then there's sort of, the gods that are kind of like mortals but immortal. They got all the same greeds and sins and vices, and and then you have kind of a high divinity above that. So the daemons are kind of middle orders, and they can be connected with good or bad things in
Mm.
classical thinking. It's
Mm.
in Christian thinking that they become demons in the way
Mm.
of evil beings. Okay,
Famously, Socrates speaks of his daemon, right? In sort of,
exactly. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah. So
in
the
positive,
Greeks are
positive
really
terms.
really into this idea of like the rhapsode when he's reciting Homer has a muse. He's possessed, and
Mm.
you're taken to by imagination and words to this. You participate in this thing, right?
Yes.
Um, so the beautiful little book by E.R. Dodds, The Greeks and the Irrational,
Mm.
um, is fantastic. They had a really windows open
Oh, yes,
concept of the way the spiritual integrates with the physical.
of course.
Um, so in the Greco-Roman world, you had the gods you would have your procession from a temple to the arena, and the gods would be integral in everything that happened in the arena. And the idea was the audience gets lifted above the mortals in their contest, and they are put in a demonic position. Okay, so the audience participates in this. We're above the contest of life and death, and there they are down there below us, um, and uh, and somehow the crowd has this daemonic energy
Mm.
uh, that makes the whole thing significant for the actors as well, right? Um, and so Shannon takes this idea and he says, well, look, we've got this spectacle culture too, like big time.
Of
And
course.
we're doing the same thing. We're lifting ourselves up above the mortal actors. Like, and I see this in Australia. We love footy.
Mm. Yes.
And it's the spectator thing, there they are down there, those mortals struggling, and everything's a contest, and we love a contest, right? It's an
Yes.
agonistic view of the world,
Mm.
and we're we're watching the fight and we're barracking, but we're above it, right? So they're like in the arena, they're doing our thing for us. I've got a bit off track. Where was I going with this, Hassan?
So we're talking about the daemons, the oh goodness, I've lost the thread as well. that's totally.
No, there was a good point in there about contemporary.
Right. So about the technology. Oh, the Matrix, and you mentioned the reference
That's
of
the prism for our mind. The prism for our mind.
Yes, and
Okay.
how we have minders. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So the Greco-Roman world was very explicit about the spiritual powers being integral with physical things, and so a cohort of soldiers was at once just a bunch of men, but also a spiritual entity. And when St. Paul talks about principalities and powers, these are not simply out there, they're part of the structure and social political structure of the culture in which they live. Okay. So there's an integral conception of these things, and the basic principle is worship. Okay. So Augustine, and this is where Shannon book's great. Okay. That Augustine says, okay, the city of God is different from the city of man because the first principle of the city of man is the love of self. Self-worship is the principle of the city of man, and it's through that idolatry, it becomes subject to demonic powers, and the demonic powers are energized in a way which will destroy the true human flourishing, because true human flourishing comes to those who worship God first and love God as love God, and then love their neighbor as themselves. Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the first principle of worship. You do that, you get human flourishing. If you make the glory of the self the basic principle of worship of a society, it degenerates into a war of all against all, and a struggle to be in the elite victor culture, and violence and power are the dominant mode, right? So that's the direction we're going in. And
Of course, yes.
you can see how what's happened is this huge sort of shift in worship culture in Western civilization over the past 200 years, from a culture strongly in, we've always been sinners, right? But nonetheless, strongly embedded in a theological framework where justice was meant to be mediated from God to human institutions, and they were meant to be governed by divine revelation in order to produce a just and fair society for all. Okay, now, whether they did that or not's another question, but like that was what they were aspiring towards. Okay, and we've thrown that out, and now the self and elites are the center of worship, and we have all these icons and these idols who we worship, right? And they are expressions. They are expressions of our own aspirations,
right? Our own base aspirations, right?
Just like the Athenian gods, just like the gods of Greece. The Athena is Athens writ large, right? So it's kind of the principle of self-worship is governing our. So the most powerful dynamic in any society is spiritual, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not spiritual out there in the sky. It's spiritual in socio-political, cultural dynamics of power.
Yes.
And so you get the worship right, you'll have human flourishing. You get the worship wrong, as it said in the book of Leviticus, I put before you life and death. Choose this day life. And life is the first two commandments. And instead we pursue love of the self as the basic idolatry, and we're in a lot of trouble.
That's so profound. I really, really appreciate that so much. That Yeah, I mean, it's no matter what, how society is playing out, that there's a profound spiritual dimension to it, and it's about getting the spirituality, getting the worship right.
Yes.
That's very, very profound, and that's very in keeping with some of my intuitions on. I mean, we can't do away. We, in theory, have done away with religion, right? We're supposedly post-religious in many ways, but I can't help but feel that we are so religious, and so in maybe not in a traditional sense, but so religious in another sense. And ultimately, the ultimate idol, of course, is the idol of the self, which that doesn't go away so easily, and it literally takes, right, from a traditional religious spiritual point of view, it takes a lifetime of work to even begin to approach uh, sort of discarding that. And but if we live in a world where that is of primary um, value, then how are we ever to get away from this self idolatry, which is the root cause ultimately, really, of all the ills in the world. So beautiful, so powerful. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate you so much, and appreciate all the work that you've been doing. What are you working on currently? You're writing so much and thinking about all these incredible things. What's your current book project?
Okay, I've doing a book with Baker Academic. God bless them, lovely people.
Yes.
Um, uh, I think at the moment the title I like is uh, suggested by David Bentley Hart. Actually,
Oh, amazing! Yes.
he's doing a foreword for me,
Oh,
which is very good.
beautiful. Yes.
Um, it's the conversation must begin again: Christian theology and science.
Amazing, amazing.
And so,
So, yes.
trying to rethink the whole thing from the ground up. Because what tends to happen in science and religion is science always comes first, and religion has to measure itself against
Against.
science. And so, what this means is science is our first truth discourse in our academic culture. And the minute theology is a subsidiary to the first truth discourse, it's no longer Christian theology, whatever it is.
Of course.
So
Very.
how do you think, what is Christianity, Christian theology, and then think about science is what my book's about.
Oh, that's amazing. That really just gave me chills because it's so important to remember and to restate even that, right, that theology has to come first, religion has to come first, God has to and is already first, right? We just pretend that he isn't. And if science is put first, then anything, if religion is measuring against itself against science, then it's not religion, it's not theology. And I mean, I can't also, I really feel that um, a lot of the sort of so-called technological advancements we have, and I mean, just in the area, in the realm of armaments, right? This incredible sort of machine of and the military-industrial complex, which is this insane behemoth. I can't help but feel that if we had a more traditionally religious understanding of things, theological understanding of things, we would not, I mean, whoever the we is in this, uh, would not be producing some of these insane technologies of death and torture and violence.
Yes.
Um,
And we
it's
think of ourselves as more advanced in the past, and the 20th century was the century of mega death.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, what are the figures? They say that the 20th century alone saw more deaths as a result of war and violence than all the centuries put together previously. I mean, it sounds insane, but apparently that's true. And God knows what this century is going to shape up to be. And by the looks of things, it's not going to be any better. It may even be worse. And so, no, absolutely, we really need to restate our theological positions with confidence and stridence, and in conversation with some of these dominant voices, which which is dominating the headlines or the limelight at the moment. But well, thank you so much again for your incredible time, and it's real pleasure and honor, and very, very sort of enlightening experience for me. And all my prayers for your your continued health and well-being, and your family's well-being, and success in an integral, holistic sense in everything that you do. And please continue to sort of glean these sort of profound insights, and help us navigate these very sort of strange times and waters that we find ourselves on at the moment. Unprecedented, right? Unprecedented is probably the most used word in the past year. It's unprecedented times.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for talking with me, Hassan.
Oh
It's been
no,
lovely.
it's a real pleasure, pleasure and honor. God bless you, and I look forward to talking again with you, and again,
Wonderful.
genuinely benefiting from you, and yeah, I'll send you an email, and I'd love to sort of connect with you about some other things. It'd be a real pleasure.
Wonderful, Hassan. Thank you very much.
God bless you.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Yeah.